Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Business from the Bass Boat Podcast. This is your host, Adam Deakin. Again, we are always powered by X2 Power. And just wanted to say this is going to be a really cool show because we are talking about kind of the most important thing that your batteries do, or what the majority of your battery power is being used for, and that is trolling motors. Last week was Icast, and through that, unfortunately, didn't make it down there this year. Bailey was down there from the Serious Angler crew. Sounded like a great show. And with Icast, there always comes new product launches. Generally, all parts of the industry, mostly baits, tackle, that kind of a thing. But one thing that was kind of pre-launched, and there's been talk about it, and you hear all these different things, but that was basically the new Minn Kota motor lines. Brushless motors being tossed around as a term a lot. So we went to the source and figured we'd get Adam with Minn Kota on to talk all the details on the new Minn Kota motors and kind of just the future of trolling motors in general. What we're going to see, they seem to be being updated so often. There's a lot of competition in the trolling motor market space. So without further ado, let's bring Adam in. How's it going, Adam?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you today, Adam?
Oh, we might have not quite hear you. Did you maybe change? Hold up. I'm dumb. Okay. Go ahead and say that one more time. I think I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. That was my bad. I didn't have it set on my settings. The people can hear you, so there's no problems there. But no, I guess I didn't catch that. I guess it's Adam's. It's so weird saying Adam to a guest coming on. I don't think I've ever had another Adam. It's weird hearing your own name.
So, and for much of my life, I didn't know too many Adams, and now I feel like in the fishing industry, there are a ton. And so I constantly end up, I'll stand next to an Adam and somebody will say, "Hey, Adam." And then, three of us will turn.
Dude, that's actually true. I agree. Like, it was always, I felt like, I don't think I've ever had another Adam in like a class growing up, like in school or anything. There was never another Adam. But now being an adult and in the fishing industry, like, there has been a couple of Adams around. That's a strange point.
Well, it's a pretty exclusive club, but anybody named Adam, you got to get along.
That's right. And it's always great if things are going alphabetical order, like your name always gets called first. Like, so there's some benefits to having the first name of Adam.
Oh, there's advantages for sure.
That's awesome. Well, dude, first of all, I know you were down at Icast, probably had a really busy week last week and just so much going on. What were your thoughts of just Icast, the show, in the first place?
It was good, man. So I look forward to, there's a couple of things that we do every year on the marketing calendar. One of them is the Bassmaster Classic, and one of them is Icast. And those two shows I really look forward to, because with the Classic, it's a little bit more consumer facing. We're actually talking to the people using the products. But at Icast, it's really nice to be able to actually go out, see the people who have been in the industry for a long time. And, it's kind of like a family reunion every year where we get to see a lot of the same people. People we've worked with in the past, partners. So I really love going to Orlando every year and seeing those guys. Obviously, it's a lot of work as well. But man, I enjoyed it. But everything that leads up to it is obviously really demanding in a number of different ways. So it is a bit of a relief to have gotten back and now be back with the family for a little while.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just like a stressor, right? It's like working all this time for this point and all of this stuff going up to this week. So it's kind of a nice, like, weight off your chest after something happens, especially when it goes well and that kind of a thing.
Absolutely. And just in general, I mean, the ASA does a really good job with Icast, and I think the way that the entire thing is handled, the show is always great. And so I appreciate the venue. It's actually, so I was counting with some of my coworkers, we were all talking about how many years we had been going, and I was thinking back, and we've always stayed at the same hotel, and it's like every July I know exactly what hotel I'm going to be staying at to go to Icast, and it's just, it's one of those things that ends up now being nostalgic, but it's a cool experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you kind of develop those consistent things, and it's you get excited every time you go back there, those places that you see, just because it's been such a consistent thing for yourself. And it's, like you said, keep going back there. Now, I did hear at one point Icast had considered going to Vegas. I know it's been obviously in Florida for a very long time now, but have you heard anything about that, or is that just a rumor that I had
So I think they're locked into Orlando for at least a couple years now, but there was a time, and it was probably 10 years ago, when they used to bounce back and forth between Orlando and Vegas
Right.
the year. And so it had been there for a while. I don't see them changing, and I think the big driver of that's probably going to be the on the water portion.
Sure.
So even Icast on the water, it's always the Tuesday before it opens. It's on, I think it's the pond, the North Pond behind the Orange County Convention Center. But to try and do something like that in Las Vegas, to have any on the water would be very difficult, because you may or may not know this, but it's a desert.
Right. No, exactly. You've got Lake Mead, which has plenty of its own water issues, right? You know, not too far out of town, but you're still talking an hour out of Vegas as far as a bigger body of water goes. But that's a good point as far as on the water stuff goes. I think Florida too is just such a big place when it comes to the fishing industry.
Yeah, huge for sport fishing for sure.
Right. And not just freshwater and everything. I mean, it's just such a big part of the industry. So it makes sense to have it. Although it's not centrally located country wise, it's centrally located probably for quite a few different brands.
Well, and so this is the one gripe that I have with Icast every year, is that it's in the middle of July and it's always in a very warm climate. And so just setting up the booth and stuff like that is always something that it's like, it's a brotherhood of, you know, people just sweating, setting up fixtures basically.
For sure. It's like, you know, time wise, why do we have to, I get it. It's kind of probably like the two major shows, like you're talking, the Classic and Icast, having the two separate time zones or times of the year is really good. But as far as weather goes, like it doesn't get much hotter than July in Florida or Vegas for that matter. Like both those places are extremely brutal in July.
Absolutely. And so a lot of it, I'm sure, has to do with timing of when people have their assortments for retailers and dealers and things like that set up. So sure. I totally get it. But man, it would be nice to have that in November or December. And especially as somebody who lives in Wisconsin, to leave ice fishing and go down to Florida for a week wouldn't be that bad.
Right. Totally. Yeah, no, I like it. I think it change Icast, just make it a little bit later in the year to prolong winter for folks living in the northern states. Well, awesome. Well, Adam, I wanted to kind of break down first, more than anything, how you kind of got involved with Minn Kota. Also, for folks, what's your role currently? What's your title with Minn Kota and everything that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work on the brand team. My title is brand manager for Minn Kota.
Okay.
For a long time, I was the associate brand manager, or one of the associate brand managers. There have been a couple, and there still are. But ultimately, so it's been a long and winding road to get to this point, and all really good things. So I actually, I fished in college. So I went to the University of Wisconsin. I majored in economics and math, if you can believe it. Now working in marketing. But the one goal, I wanted to work in the outdoor industry. That was the most important thing to me. And so I was actually really fortunate. There was an organization called Maurice Sporting Goods, which now has been purchased, or it's gone essentially. But they were recruiting specifically from Big Ten schools with competitive fishing programs. And so I ended up doing an internship there. Yeah. So it worked out really well because the stars kind of aligned with that. So when I got the internship, and this is a long story, but the actual physical location was in like the north suburbs of Chicago. And so I didn't really know anybody around there. Wasn't sure that I could afford any place really close. And so a really close friend of mine by the name of Matt Cook, who now works at Stryker Apparel, I asked him if I could sleep on his couch basically for the summer while I did this internship. He ended up later becoming the brand manager for Humminbird, and we had always stayed connected. And so it ended up working out that after I did some product development, some sourcing stuff at Maurice Sporting Goods, the associate brand manager job for Minn Kota opened up. Interviewed, the rest is history. That was 4.5, 5 years ago.
Oh, just cut out there just for a second. Oh, the 4 or 5 years ago is the last thing I heard. Is that the last thing you said?
That was the last thing I said.
Okay. I wonder if there's just a slight delay. It's not. it sounds fine, but that's great. I mean, I think that's super important part about any job, but especially in the fishing industry is kind of those personal connections that you make can take you really, really far. I met Matt at the Classic this last year with Stryker. Seems like an awesome guy, and
Yeah.
it's just cool to hear how kind of all that stuff is connected. And I love asking folks on the show just how they got involved in the industry, because every story is different. There's so many different wild and crazy stories on how folks get in, because it is kind of a hard industry to break into. But you know, it's an awesome industry. And once you have your foot in the door, there seems to be a lot of opportunity.
Well, and so the thing that I forgot to mention was that Matt actually was on the fishing team in Wisconsin with me. That's how we originally met, and so that was kind of a long-standing friendship. But you're exactly right. So I think from an outside perspective, it seems like this is a really gigantic industry, and it is obviously sizable from a revenue perspective. But I think the number of people who actually work in it is relatively small. It's
Right.
difficult to find opportunities, I think, and so one of the things that I'm always really grateful for is that I get to work in an industry that I'm passionate about. Because I say it all the time, but I don't think it would be the same if I had to do this job for a Tupperware company, for instance, or
Right.
macaroni and cheese or something. And so the things that I do in my free time, I do at work in a lot of cases, and it's not always that way. Obviously, there's still a business that needs to
Good
happen,
work.
but
Yeah.
making videos and so if my boss walked in and I was watching a video on YouTube about fishing, they would be like, wow, this guy's really putting in the hours, working hard. But it's like, I would do that in my free time anyway.
That's awesome. It's so true. It's like at the end of the day, like if you can find a career where you would be doing that, regardless of if you're getting paid or not, you might as well try and find one where you can actually, to get paid for doing the things you would be doing anyways.
Absolutely.
That's like the dream. That's great. So what year did you graduate from the University of Wisconsin?
So I graduated in 2015, if I'm remembering. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to check my sheepskin, I guess. But 2015, I believe, is the year that I graduated. I think it was in the fall. And then I worked at, like I said, Marie Sporting Goods. So initially, I was an intern in product management, and then I was an assistant associate product manager there, which was really cool. It was a really interesting experience, and so much was happening at that company at the time, where we had fishing brands, but we also had hunting brands, we had ice brands, and so we were working on all these different timelines and all these different development cycles. And so it was a really cool experience, and I learned a lot in a very short amount of time. And then towards the end of my time there, I ended up, I think my title was import buyer, but it was basically doing sourcing. And so I remember in 2018, almost all of November, I went to China, and I was going to factories and negotiating costs and basically doing new product development all simultaneously. And I remember the year because it was like 4 months after my first daughter was born. And I came back on Thanksgiving. And so I remember that. And at the time I drove a diesel truck, and
Yeah.
there was this big cold snap, and my truck wouldn't start when I got back.
Been there. Yep. That's I drove a diesel truck for a long time, and I miss it sometimes for sure. But definitely always something you gotta consider being I'm in Colorado, so during our winters there certainly can be times where you have to remember to plug it in, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, there's pros and cons for sure.
It's pros and cons. Well, that's awesome. The reason I was kind of asking, I fished in college too. I graduated in 2018, but man, I really enjoyed those memories made and those friendships that have kind of lasted a long time. And in your case, have truly extended your career and those kinds of things. It's really cool that that company was recruiting Big Ten school fishing anglers because they knew they were going to be passionate about what they were doing. That's such a cool thing to me. I wonder if other companies are doing that today with some of these fishing teams of targeting these different anglers.
I think it's some capacities for sure. And I know just at my organization, there's a number of people who fished in college. And I think there's two things that you can mark down when you know somebody fished in college. They went to college, which is good, and they fished and they're
Plus,
passionate about fishing. And so once you cross those two things off the list, it's pretty hard to find a candidate that's not super compelling.
right. Yeah. And it's just like, it's an interesting thing in the industry, something that we've right now with the Serious Angler crew, we're kind of looking at different interns potentially and some hired positions. And it's like, it's hard to find folks who have that passion and that skill set kind of together. And to me, a great lead are student anglers, right? Because they're coming out, they're learning what they need in school, and they're ready to kind of take on the world. And they clearly have the passion if they've competed and have drawn down everything from a fishing perspective. You just know talking to somebody whether they know the fishing industry or not. And it's interesting when you talk to someone who is in the industry that doesn't really come from a fishing background, but there's some folks who end up being awesome in the fishing industry and get it. You know what I mean? They roll into it and they learn everything. And I don't know. It's cool to me how everyone has a different story and background and meshes. And sounds like you got awesome opportunities and currently are in a role that you really are passionate about.
Yeah, so I'm extremely fortunate to have had the opportunities that I have. And just in terms of, finding somebody who fishes and is, a business-minded person, I think it's really 50-50, because if somebody's a really good angler, but they're not committed to doing the actual work, then that person's not going to work out. But if somebody isn't committed to at least understanding the angler, that person generally is not going to work as well. And so it's a really delicate balance, because I think you don't have to be an angler yourself to be successful in this industry, but I think you have to understand and respect the persona, right? The person who is. And so if you're going to be somebody who looks down on an angler or doesn't really take them seriously or sort of paints them as this caricature of what they really are, then that inauthenticity is going to show through every time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great line on the success of folks in the industry. Um, let's dig right into everything new with Minn Kota. Obviously, this unveiling, a lot of pressure on yourself, getting all of this set up. Icast have seen some videos, and you've been hearing different things talked about. The new brushless motor from Minn Kota, standing just such the test of time. I mean, I don't know. I think my first boat may have had a motor guide. After that, it has been like Fortrex, Ultrex, the whole way, right? Like it has just been this. I've gotten so comfortable on those motors, and I really understand them, and I like everything about it. And then like this new Quest is like, it kind of looks the same, but there are so many differences from the ground up. And so I think we just break down some of that and get your feedback and everything that kind of went into this motor.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I think about a lot is, so we started making trolling motors in 1934. We've shipped over 11 million of them. We really are a trolling motor company. I think there's a lot of companies that can make a trolling motor. But the one thing that we wanted to do, and we want to continue to do, is make sure that we're thinking about it holistically and that we are firmly committed to the trolling motor space. And it's not just sort of a one-off thing or one-off opportunity that we're doing.
Yeah.
And so when we launched, I think the question has been, is Minn Kota going to launch a brushless trolling motor? And we didn't launch a brushless trolling motor. We launched an entire line of brushless trolling motors, basically from the ground up. And so we have been working on this without hyperbole for years, and it's something that we wanted to make sure was 100% correct. And so the majority of all the motors that we build are in Mankato, Minnesota, where we assemble them. And we also have a lot of R&D and testing, not only in that facility, but in the field. And so starting from the ground up, basically we had to rethink the way that we were building our own products, the ones that we're known for. And so it was a process for sure, but absolutely a worthwhile one when we think about what the outcome was. And so just thinking specifically about really everything that we've kind of brought to the table now, we not only launch brushless trolling motors, Quest trolling motors, but we also have an entire new bow mount line. And so when you think about this, I mean, over 100 SKUs, we're talking about a lot of motors, but we updated everything, and it's specifically for the consumer. And the consumer is at the heart of everything we do. But we are making things easier every step of the way. We're making it easier to connect. We're making our products easier to use. And we're also making products for everybody. And so if you're that tip of the spear Quest user, that's one thing. But we still make products for the everyday guy who maybe wants a more affordable value option. And so we have good products, better products, best products. But we have everything for, I think, all the anglers out there. And so specifically when we were developing Quest motors, starting from scratch, the easy thing to do would have been to put a lower unit on our current motors that was brushless. So when we started with the lower unit that we chose, essentially we knew that there was going to be some differences, but the first thing that we noticed was that our shafts were flexing more than usual. So we actually impregnated those with carbon fiber.
So,
And you can kind of
1 second here. So the new brushless motor you're saying had more power and therefore was flexing the current shaft that was on the Ultrex or the Ultrex at the time.
correct. And I think, in the bass world, we think about an Ultrex specifically, and so it's maybe a 45 or a 52 or even a 60-inch shaft. But we also launched a number of saltwater motors that are made for really bigger boats than we ever have. And so we have 87 and 100-inch shaft lengths.
Holy
where
cow.
you can imagine over the course of that lever arm how much it's actually swinging out.
Right.
And so all of our shafts basically had to be reinforced. You'll notice they're, instead of being tubular, they're actually a little bit more squared off now, which helps not only with steering, but it also helps to sort of mitigate some of the extra force, the extra torque from that trolling motor. And so with Quest specifically, we have 50% more torque and 30% more runtime if you compare 24-volt motors at basically wide open power. And so Quest can be run on 24 or 36 volts. So that's the important thing.
Yeah.
But the reason that we optimized specifically looking for torque is that we wanted to be able to create a better consumer experience. And specifically with those bigger boats, or specifically with weeds, we wanted to have more torque, to have that weed shedding ability, to be able to maneuver more quickly.
Sure.
We always think about, so everybody who has a boat is essentially wondered, do I need a 24 pitch or a 25 pitch prop? Do I want one that's better for whole shot, or do I want one that's better for top end speed? And so when we were developing this line of trolling motors, we really developed more on the whole shot side. And so we're specifically looking to be able to get that power that you can feel, that sort of instantaneous power, right?
But that makes a lot of sense as far as just, that's a great comparison of, would you rather have whole shot or higher top end? And realistically, especially for a foot controlled bass angler situation, generally speaking, like you want to have faster control from the beginning rather than just top end of 7 miles an hour. That's not really going to do any good unless you're just,
and eventually you get there, right?
Right. Exactly. Just, that's the whole thing with whole shot. It's just, your top end, you're designing for a faster startup, but then it's just timeline to get down the lake to that top end speed. It takes forever if you're optimizing for top end speed.
Right. And so kind of going back to the way the entire thing progressed was we made the shaft stiffer. All that force from the stiffer shaft from the lower unit had to go somewhere else. And so the mounts had to get bigger, but every pivot point, every bushing, everything basically really from the bow up has been reinforced, changed. And so a lot of these motors look like motors that you may have used in the past, whether it's an Ultrex or an Altera or a Tarova, but they are true ground up redesigns. And so these are bigger, badder, older brothers of the motors that we have today. And really, you won't appreciate it until you put your foot on it. And I mean that sincerely. And so the motors are quieter. We have better GPS than we've ever had and more features than we've ever had. They really, I think because they look similar, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, they made a brushless trolling motor. But they truly are ground up redesigns.
That's good to know. I think that is totally, when I first saw and didn't kind of really do any digging on details, I thought the same thing. I'm like, okay, well, this is looking really similar. Yeah, the head design's a little smaller. It's a brushless motor, which is kind of been the forefront here the last couple of years in the trolling motor industry, right, of going brushless. And so you don't really notice all these little differences, but that's good to hear. I think folks need to go put their foot on it, and hopefully they can do that kind of soon. One question, we can kind of get in this at the end too, but what's the timeline on these motors? Can you order them now? When can folks get their hands on them?
So really general availability is going to be in the fall of this year. So starting in October, November is when you're going to start to see them actually available at dealers. And really a lot of that is just pipeline fill. So you can imagine the intricate supply chain that we have right now going from us to distribution to dealers, getting into mass merchants and things like that. And really, so it'll be a couple months, but we're building them now. We have them in some cases available, but for the most part, wide scale availability is going to be fall of 2023 here.
Gotcha. Okay. So folks ordering boats in that timeline, hopefully you can get that get that new motor on there as well. So sorry to cut you off, just talking about just how this thing was being designed from the ground up. So it sounded like started with the motor and then worked your way up, just upgrading all the shaft, all the bushings, all those parts that kind of wear out, especially when you're talking more power, just kind of more durability. It sounds like throughout the whole unit in itself. Once you get up to the top of the trolling motor, what changes are there? Is there anything changed from engaging the trolling motor and lifting it, putting it into the water, putting it that kind of a thing? What's the process look like there?
Yeah, and there's a ton of small things that I think add up to a really big thing. And so the first is you'll notice that if you stow and deploy the trolling motor, we actually have it auto index. And so as you pull it out of the water, we call it auto park. The lower unit will turn itself perpendicular to the mount.
Oh,
so you
nice.
don't have to mess with the pedal at all when you're pulling it out of the water. And it's going to align itself perfectly every time. But the opposite of that is true. And you can toggle it on and off either in the app or there's a number of different ways to do it. You can do it in the app, on your remote, potentially, or on your Humminbird unit in a lot of cases. But essentially, when you put your motor into the water, it'll automatically go straight forward. And so you don't really have to waste time trying to find space. And it sounds like it's such a small thing, but that's valuable seconds. And over the course of a fishing day, I think those seconds really matter. So that's sort of the initial just stow and deploy experience change. We've completely redesigned the lift assist that we have, and we actually have updated lift assist cylinders, aftermarket ones that you can buy.
Oh, really?
So, yep. So if you have 360 and target lock on your trolling motor, we basically make redesigned larger diameter lift assist cylinders so that if you want to restore the general weight of stow and deploy of your initial motor, because we spend a lot of time on it, but it's very carefully calibrated. And so if you put in cylinders that are too big from the beginning, it won't stow and deploy correctly, or it'll be overcharged. And so that's consumer upgradable after the fact if you have those accessories. We also have 100% of our trolling motors that are bow mount GPS enabled trolling motors are one boat network compatible. So what that really means is that anything can hook up to a Humminbird via Ethernet right out of the box. And it's not just, so in the past we've had iPilot, which was, it had GPS, but it wouldn't connect to a Humminbird, and iPilot Link, which would connect to a Humminbird and had GPS. Okay. Moving forward, everything out of the box is going to connect to Humminbird. There's no distinction between the two. But we also have all of the dongling, all the cabling, everything that you need to connect to that Humminbird unit comes in the box. And so from a Apex and Solex perspective, those are going to connect right away, both via Ethernet and for any sonar that you might have built into your lower unit. For Helix units, we include, it's called an ASEC QDE. So we have the Ethernet adapter that goes to the back of your Helix unit, and we also have whatever adapter you need to connect to your Helix for sonar included as well. And the other thing too, so obviously live sonar is a big deal. With the change to our trolling motor shaft specifically for Ultrex, we're including an adapter that actually clamps onto the shaft of your trolling motor for Mega Live. And so if you run Mega Live on your current Ultrex, it's a tubular shaft, and so there's some level of variability when you actually install that on the shaft of your trolling motor. There's some level of user error that you can do. And so now as we have this tubular shaft, one, we include the clamp. So if you already have Mega Live, you can put it on right away without having to go buy an extra part. But it also, because it's a tube, or because it's a squared off shaft, it's going to go on the correct way every time, or it's going to be very consistent every time. And so you imagine trying to use the head of your trolling motor to figure out where your beam is pointed for live. I hate that. Now you know that your transducer and your head are aligned every time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny about that is like I jump on another friend's boat and, he'll literally be like, yeah, so like where that arrow is pointing, it's like slightly to the left, and you just kind of get used to wherever your live sonar is going, that it's like slightly off. But that's always been, I hate that. Like I'm just someone who is not perfect, but I strive in those situations to have like a perfectly straight situation. And the days of like, oh, is it lined up exactly? Like I hate that. So it's nice that it's square tubular.
And so that's the thing is, anytime that there's any level of variability with users, there will be variability with users when they actually install it. And so being able to have something that sort of takes away that sort of decision-making process or allows them to be consistent every time is ultimately going to help them be more consistent in the way that they fish every day.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think the The thing for me too with I think it doesn't even, it's hard to kind of tell on the pictures and videos of the differences, especially like in the shaft. Like I can't really 100% look without maybe having it in front of me to have that squared off. But it seems like it's just such a small difference in things, but it makes a lot of sense on how going to square versus round helps in so many ways. It also, you're saying strength wise, it doesn't, it, why is a square shaft stronger than a circular shaft? Or is there anything strength wise related to it?
So it is a little bit strength related. And the other thing that helps us specifically in this scenario is if you imagine trying to hold onto a hockey stick and turn it with your wrist, the square one is easier to turn than a PVC pipe because you sort of lose your grip
Sure.
there.
Torque
And so
wise.
as we
Okay.
talk about the ability to actually turn the shaft with the steering motor, that's one of the things that's going to continue to help us do and gives more
That's
power
a
to the
good point.
steering.
I see. Okay. Okay. Just learning so much about little intricate details on a trolling motor. I'm sure you have like just the amount of time put into this around different details has to just be an incredible amount of testing and back and forth and trying to get every detail lined up.
And it's an iterative process. So there's a lot of things that, we start with one thing and we test it, and we say this isn't going to work, and we update it in one way or another. But we have better routing for our coil cords, or basically better routing for our Ethernet and for our sonar cables. But we also, in Minn Kota, we have things like it's called a QFOG, but it's a salt fog sprayer. We actually shower all our motors in salt water for some period of time to test how well they'll hold up.
Oh wow.
We have a robot arm in all these tank rooms, essentially, where we have a robot that constantly stows and deploys motors through life cycles, which will be anywhere from 10,000 beyond. So 10,000 times this robot is actually stowing and deploying this trolling motor into a tank. Yep, over and
Holy
over.
cow.
And if anything fails, we go back to the drawing board and we start from scratch and we make a new one that won't fail.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, I think to me the R&D and just the durability side has always been a concern when it comes to trolling motors, right? Like folks just they run them through stuff. Like I I have done plenty of damage to trolling motors being in places where they probably weren't designed to go, right? Like hitting a log, hitting a stump in muddy water, not seeing it at like a very high speed, especially if you're low on the shaft. Like you can have issues shaft wise, or being in super heavy grass is just always such a pain on trolling motors. Or something that I experienced for the first time this last year fishing a Toyota series on the Delta in California was tide goes out. I was getting around fine. Tide goes out, and those grass beds like got way, way, way thicker, right? It was just
Oh
like
yeah.
all of that going out. And then you're like, okay, this isn't the same as it was 2 hours ago, and I am not able to get through this like I was, get on the big motor and go different places. But it's just cool to see like those types of things being tested in a factory style setting to just to bulk everything up. And one thing too that I've always thought, I took off my 360 in a tournament just because the grass was getting really, really bad. And I was actually making a really long run anyways and just didn't want to worry about durability aspects of it. But taking that off and then going back to my trolling motor and going to raise it up was just like, holy crap, like so much lighter. And literally Bailey and I had a conversation. I was like, dude, 360 is so heavy. He's like, literally look at the specs. It's not that heavy. But I'm like, it's crazy to me, those like differences that everything makes. It's cool that on the new one you can upgrade, because more and more you're seeing guys with just an absolute conglomerate of electronic units on the front of the boat, but then all those transducers also on the trolling motor. And all that is just adding more wear and tear to all your bushings. It's adding, it's you know, destroying the life quicker on everything, including, I'm trying to think of the term, but basically that shock that's the assisted lift, right? So it's cool that you can upgrade that post getting that product, because anymore it's very uncommon to see just a blank trolling motor, right? Without some sort of live transducer, without 360, without maybe an additional turret mounted 360 or mounted live situation. So um just it's just cool to see that, you know, getting more advanced with the times and just what the future is going to hold in how we're making stuff bigger and better in the industry.
And we do so much research to try and see the ways that people are using our trolling motors that we didn't really expect, because it's always really surprising. And we'll test for a certain way of this is how we expect people to use it, and then we'll see a video on YouTube or somebody will come to us and be like, hey, I've been using my trolling motor this way. Like, what do you recommend? And it's like, well, we hadn't thought about that. Now we have to incorporate that into the entire thing, and especially now, I think as people are adding more and more transducers to the front of their boat, there is a lot of different cable routing scenarios. There's a lot of different transducers that you can put on your trolling motor. And when you do that, and obviously between Mega Live Target Lock and 360, that's just stuff hanging off that now we have to account for and make sure that we're making the best consumer experience possible, so that they can lower that trolling motor and raise that trolling motor for the entire lifetime of the product. So that I always joke that Minn Kota products are heirloom quality. Like, you should be able to pass them on to your kid, and that's the thing that we always strive for, is making sure that we have that durability, that reliability.
That's awesome. That's great. I think another thing that I was really interested in was just the ability to see the battery life on your trolling motor. It's something I think everyone has had issues with at some point, if you're a tournament angler or just an angler in general, of maybe you have a bad battery, or it's a sight fishing tournament and you're spending 4 days in practice looking on 10 the entire time around every bank, and you're just trying to always manage those expectations. And obviously with lithium batteries and everything that has advanced to this point, you have a lot more there. But it's just, I'm starting to learn that boats and everything around tournament bass fishing breaks. And the more knowledge that I have on the forefront, for instance, checking an app and seeing, oh gosh, okay, something's wrong with this battery or whatever it is. Like, I don't care what you're using, like, things just break. So having more data to look at throughout your day, I think, is important.
Well, knowledge is power, right? And so even beyond the idea of it breaking, I think tournament anglers specifically do everything that they can to get that little bit of an edge. And so if it's managing your time and your power better, then more power to you. So the real-time battery monitoring that we have is actually really great, specifically for lithium batteries. And lithiums are great. I think the big thing is, because they stay at a very specific voltage for so long and then are basically turned off, it's difficult to tell what you actually have for a charge, because you can't measure voltage in the way that you could in the past. And so the way that our real-time battery monitoring works is it'll prompt you when you do your initial setup. Are you running it on 24 or 36 volts? What's your battery chemistry? So you're running lithium, AGM, gel, lead acid. And then what is the reserve capacity of those batteries? And so knowing that and having knowledge of what the actual current drives of the trolling motor, we're able to extrapolate the exact, not only how many hours you have left on your batteries, but also the time of day when your batteries are going to die. And so if you say, well, my check-in time is 3 p.m. for my tournament, right now my Humminbird is telling me that I'm only going to make it till 2:30. Well, dial it back a little bit and make sure that you can have that power for the entire rest of the day. Mm-hmm. And when you actually get to 20% of your usable battery life, I think we're all used to, on our cell phones, they'll say, you're reaching 20% of life. Do you want to go into eco mode? Do you want to go into power saving mode? So now we have eco mode on our trolling motors, which you can turn on through the Humminbird. And it'll prompt you at 20%, say, do you want to extend your battery life in eco mode? You can turn it on at any time. But basically, we know when you're getting down to that 20% mark, you're probably getting to a point where you can burn up your batteries pretty quick if you're fishing on 10.
Sure. Or in current, right? Like, think about guys on the St. Lawrence and those kinds of things, like, just eats at your battery life when you're on spot lock sitting there and stuck drifting in a current. It's good to, just like you said, preventative, know where you're at, because there's already so much that's uncontrollable, and it's an additional thing you can control. I think that's huge.
Yeah. And so you mentioned current, and so it just brought something else to mind. So I know I mentioned that we had all updated GPS. It's enhanced GPS suite, but we actually have a new specific feature that I'm really excited about. It's called drift mode. Okay. And so I think this is actually going to be really cool, potentially, to see how people use this on bigger tournaments coming up, guys who already have it. But drift mode is basically, in the same way that spot lock is a GPS anchor, drift mode is a GPS drift sock.
Oh, and so
it's really cool. And so if you're not casting to specific targets, if you're out on, like, I think about Lake St. Clair, so I'm interested to see when the elite guys go there in a couple of weeks, what ends up happening. But basically, if you were going to cover this big expansive weed flat and you have a 5-mile-an-hour wind coming across, you can set a vector heading and you can set a speed over ground. And so the motor will actually turn around and slow you down to, if you want to go 1 mile an hour. And so you no longer need a drift sock. You no longer need drift paddles on your shallow water anchors or anything like that. And I see it as being really applicable to basically every market. I see bass, walleye, and like big boat saltwater stuff going over a wreck. And then out in the ocean, you can do the same thing until you find a productive area to fish and you spot lock. And so being able to create those artificial drifts, but also being able to manage your time on the water by not being blown around in the wind, I think is going to be a big deal.
Wow. That's really cool. That's well now, how could you utilize that same thing? So my only experience in drifting when we're talking bass fishing has been on like the St. Lawrence River. Open's going on there right now, right? Where guys are just nosing the boat into the current, and then your job is just maintaining the same speed as the current that you're coming with, right? Like is basically to just try and keep that as a supernatural. Your bait presentation is the same natural. So in that setting, same situation, you can basically set that drift speed to match what the current's doing. Or is that kind of just trial and error to set that speed, and then you're just going straight down a flat?
So if you know exactly what the speed is, you can set that speed over ground in the app or the remote. And so you can say, I want to go 1.2, 1.3, whatever.
Right. And it'd be easy to get that speed because you would just drift without anything and then look down and then it's like, okay, I'm going 1.4 miles an hour or whatever it is.
Yep.
And then you're hitting that same thing.
Yep.
Wow.
And so with today, so if you have a trolling motor today and you have autopilot and cruise control, you can almost do it. But the big difference is normally if you're going, what cruise control on today's motors cares about is if you're going the correct speed or if you're going up to the correct speed.
Okay.
And so as long as you're going that speed, that's fine. And if you're going faster than that speed, it doesn't turn around and try and slow you down at all. And so moving forward, our motors are going to know basically, regardless of how quickly you're going, if you're going faster, it'll slow you down. If you're going slower, it'll speed you up. So you're going the exact speed you want to go, no matter what that is.
Wow. That's crazy. That's cool to see. Yeah, there's going to be so many use cases. What I love about when new technology hits is just like finding people who are kind of the pushers of things and try and do all the things that we don't know yet, right? And then like hopefully a call gets back to you guys and they're like, hey, look what I just found out how to do with this. And you're like, wow, that's a whole nother thing we can expand on and build products for and like go.
Yep. And it happens all the time. So we obviously have extensive field testers, but we also have people, so guides and everybody else in the field or our pros will come to us and say, I've been trying to do this. Is there a way to do it? And it's like, well, there's not today, but it's possible that we can make it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. That's so cool, man. Oh, it's just like it's just everything's getting so advanced. It's kind of crazy. And it's cool to just follow along with everything, how it goes. Do you have any thoughts on just the future of trolling motors as stuff advances? Obviously, every company, right, including Minn Kota's, probably has stuff behind the pipeline right now that they're working on for future. And you're just like, oh my gosh, there just seems to be always this continuous timeline of things coming. But not to necessarily get into any like specific details, but with the Ultrex Quest and kind of this stuff going forward, do you see any other major changes happening in the troller motor phase over the next couple of years?
Oh man, that I can talk about? Probably not. So we're obviously always working on stuff. And I think the thing that we've continued to see is that I would say the innovation cycle has continued to increase in terms of turnaround time. And so we're constantly seeing us and our competitors have to continually reimagine themselves to be able to stay relevant, which I think is a really good thing. But what I'm excited for in the industry is this idea that's, completely upends everything and says, this isn't a trolling motor anymore. It's something completely different. We're using it for something different. And I really love those sort of like disruptive ideas and the idea of that, regardless of whether it's in fishing or anything else, but specifically, imagine it applying to this where we say, okay, well, completely reimagine what you think about what this bait is or what this fish finder is or what this trolling motor is. And we're going to make one from scratch that looks nothing like that. I always appreciate seeing those things. I think it takes a lot of time to get people to adopt them. But I think those are the ones that are really compelling and have the opportunity to really captivate, I think, people's attention.
That's huge. I think that is, and fishermen especially are just so stuck in their ways on things. There is such that timeline of adopting something, right? It's kind of like in outboard motors, right? Like everyone was like, oh, two-stroke, all this and that. And then now it's like 4 strokes and they're so much more efficient and all this. But like there's still people who are like, no, give me a 2-stroke. That's all I want. It's all I ever want. And it's just how slow the consumers necessarily adopt things does not match how fast companies are competing in coming out with new products. And it's just such an interesting cycle to me. And it's like you look at like the design of a traditional bass boat right now, trolling motor on the front, shallow water anchors, outboard, fish finders, all that. Like there's just the second someone comes up with something that looks maybe something completely different, it's like people lose their minds because they're like, what? They're, like you said, there's such a long time to adopt those things because it's like it's looked the same way since minus shallow water anchors, right? Like the 80s, 70s, bass boats really haven't changed. Like the look of them, I should say. A lot has changed in bass boats, but as far as the look goes, trolling motors on the front. And so it's I just think about things like that of how our industry is and how people are, because you're right. Like there's got to be so many things that I don't even, I'm sure that you're aware of that are, I just think about that are so mind boggling and big changes to the industry. And it's like, how are consumers gonna take this?
And that's always the thing that I kind of giggle about is like when you talk to anglers, everyone does it completely differently. And everyone believes that the way that they do it is the only way that's right. And so it's like when you try to apply that to every single person where it's like, okay, but have you ever thought about it this way? Because
Right.
there are so many different, like now having the opportunity to sort of zoom out a little bit and say like, well, the fishing styles sort of seem different, but like if you really look at it globally, how different is a walleye guy from a bass guy from an inshore guy?
Right.
Like they're trying to solve the same problems, they're just doing it in different ways, and they
100%.
absolutely do not want to change. And if you think about even like the bass angler adopting spot lock, I think that was one thing that we were afraid that they were going to say like, oh, they don't want anything automated or they're really stuck in their ways. They're going to want cable steer,
Wow.
because we had Tarova and Altera for almost a decade prior to Ultrex was launched had spot lock available.
And think about that. I had no idea of that, right?
Right.
Stuck in my ways as a bass angler. Like that's insane.
And so now it's this game changing revolutionary thing in 2017 when Ultrex launched. But the walleye guys were like, well, yeah, I've known about that for years. And I've been spot locking for basically 10 years.
That makes me want to go to like guys who are early adopters in their specific field when it comes to like a walleye guy who's just always on like the new technology, right? Like that's just who he is as an angler. Same with, like you said, an offshore, inshore guy, like, out. I want to like go to those guys and see what they're doing, how they're fishing, and really like see, and then be like, hold up, we can literally apply this to what we're doing now. And like you said, how much has bass fishing changed in the last 3, 4, 5 years? Like with going out and chasing fish with your forward facing sonar, like that has completely changed everything. And there's just so much of that. And it's like, well, probably the crappie guys were sitting there like, dude, I've been looking at crappie way longer than these bass guys have. And it's just early adopters again.
And that's exactly right. So when you think about it, so this is a generalization, but the majority of lures are meant to do the same thing. They're meant to copy like a
100%.
bait fish, right?
Right.
And so you're telling me that if I went out with a guy ocean fishing, there's no conceivable way that a lure that they use that a bass angler has never seen is going to work in a freshwater scenario. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. Dead on, dude. And vice versa. Right. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Do the same thing the opposite way and be like, think about all these crazy baits that us bass fishermen think we're like, oh, this and that. And it's like, dude, they'd work just fine in a lot of different situations. I like it.
So I promise you and your listeners for that matter, if you go out and do something that you're not used to, like if you're just straight a bass guy, take an opportunity to go fish for a species that you've never fished for, and you will come away and you will come back to your bass boat looking at the sport of fishing totally differently. I promise you.
I like it. I like it. That's the new, I'm going to say 2023 has been ridiculously busy for me these last couple of months, but 2024, or maybe this fall, like goals of like looking at future trips of just being like something completely different and go learn something completely different, because you're right. Like you just have so much different perspective back when you go back to your craft and what you really like doing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, dude, I think we kind of wrap the show up with that. Certainly really appreciate your time, Adam, and giving us an insight on just the trolling motor world, everything from Minn Kota with the new line of motors. How can folks follow along with yourself, everything else Minn Kota, kind of looking at this fall launch? When can folks kind of, should they reach out to their dealer and kind of pre-order stuff now? What does that process look like?
So it's a good idea probably to go speak to your local dealer and just try and get a better understanding of, if they have an idea of if they're in the queue, probably. But really, I don't think anybody's going to want to follow along with me. I'm just a humble marketing guy. But if you want to know more about the motors, you can absolutely go to www.minnkotamotors.com, where you can learn everything about the new product line, look around at Ultrex, kind of see what options are available and learn more about accessories, and also just the thought process behind everything that we've done. We have a lot of good resources on there if you're trying to rig a boat, and really, ultimately, we try to do everything that we can to make as much genuine content and follow, true stories of the people who we fish with and who we know as anglers. And so hopefully if you go there, you'll find a little bit of entertainment, but a lot of education as well.
Love it. Love it. All right. Last 3 questions for yourself. Personal biggest, PB, largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. And I'm not sure, you're Wisconsin there, if you've gotten case spots at all.
So I've gone down and fished for spots, but I'll start with spots because my biggest is like 3 pounds, which is not particularly good, but it's pretty memorable.
I was going to say, for most places though, like take out like 7 bodies of water, maybe 7 to 10 bodies of water in the country. Like a 3-pound spot's like, that's a good spot. Like it's, you know what I mean? There's not that many places that have those jumbo spots.
For sure. So largemouth. So I don't weigh like fish when I'm fishing by myself a lot, and I haven't weighed in anything particularly big. I can remember the ones that I've weighed in are pretty easy to remember because it's a 5'2" largemouth and a 5'3" smallmouth, which is honestly not particularly good for where we are, because on Sturgeon Bay, I mean,
I'm going to say Sturgeon Bay, you're close to some megas.
Well, and so I think everybody else, like in my fishing club, or like everybody that I know personally who lives around here, has gone to Sturgeon Bay and caught one in 6s for sure.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not that particularly impressive, but I'll take it every time. I know I've caught some bigger largemouth than that, but I just haven't really, generally, I didn't fish with scales for a long time. And now that I have one, I only weigh them sometimes.
I'm not a big weigh guy unless it's a freak or, same here. Like most of my big fish, I know what they weigh because we weigh them in a tournament for the most situations. But what did you catch those fish on? I guess the spot, largemouth, smallmouth, your biggest.
So the spot was actually on a chatterbait under a dock, which was surprising to me. The largemouth was on a rattle trap. Well, it was a booyah one knocker. Excuse me.
Where were each of these fish?
The spot was on Smith.
Okay, cool.
The largemouth, again, I'm sure I've caught bigger largemouth than that, but the one that I know just because I weighed big bass here was on Lake Como, which is just down the road from me, which is not one that anybody would know.
Yeah.
And then I actually have a pretty good story about the smallmouth because it was in a tournament. I think it was like either like a state or a national semifinal. It was an end-of-year club tournament.
Okay.
And we had the banquet at the beginning of the tournament, and I think I went to the bathroom, and they were like, all right, big fish is a side pot. And so my buddy didn't pay for me, and I was like not in the room when they did that. So I didn't get in big fish. So I weighed in big fish of the tournament by like over a pound, I think. And I didn't actually win the money for big fish, which would, I mean, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was like a couple $100. So it wouldn't really have made a huge difference in my life, but it's still a bummer that I missed out on that opportunity.
For sure, man. That's like I remember a vivid memory like that. It wasn't me, it was someone else, but we had like a walleye pot in our local tournament. here in lake in northern Colorado, and some dude just stroked like a 7 or 8 pound walleye, and he's the only one of 2 guys that didn't put in for the walleye pot, and it would have been, I don't know, like $800 or something. Like, dang, that would have been a nice little bump if he just. Because of that moment, there's never a big bass pot or any kind of pot that I don't put in. And it's probably a waste of money almost all the time. But just to know that if I didn't get paid on something because I didn't put the $10 in or whatever it is, I'd be so mad.
So if you want to guarantee yourself to catch big fish of a tournament, don't enter big fish pot.
There you go. Now we're talking. I love it. All right. Well, Adam, dude, thank you for taking the time out. I know post Icast, glad you got some stress off your back and that kind of stuff. And glad it was a good trip and everything has been successful for you with the new unveiling. But wish you the best, man. You're always welcome on the show. And thanks for taking the time out on a Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I truly appreciate it. Love telling the story of Minn Kota and talking a little bit about myself. It's not that bad either. Say hi to Bailey for me for sure. I
will. I'll give him, I don't know. I'll give him some crap. That's what I like doing with Bailey.
That's smart. I think everybody does.
Awesome. All right, Adam. Thanks, man. Have a good rest of your day.
Take it easy, sir. Bye.
See you.